What's up, YouTube? KS Gun Guy here. Thanks for joining me today as always. If you like what you see here, do be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and there's plenty more content on the way. So I've got for you guys today a Sig Sauer P229 Enhanced Elite. Now I know P229s and 226s and the other P-Series firearms have been around for a long time, so this isn't necessarily something new, but I really wanted to bring one on the channel because I'm a big fan of this series of firearms, and so when I started shopping around for these, I looked at several different models, including the Legion series, but I have to say, although I love the Legion series, I had a really difficult time sacrificing that much money for one firearm because they are pretty expensive. It's at least locally, but they range somewhere between $1,100 and $1,300. So that's a pretty hefty price, even for a great firearm like a P229 Legion. So I continued to shop around, and I finally stumbled on this little guy right here, and this is the Enhanced Elite Blue Titanium Edition, and it's, from what I understand, a relatively new version of the P229 that you can find certainly on online retailers and also some local gun shops as well. And one of the great things about this is you get a ton of features, which we're going to talk about here in just a moment. But from a value standpoint, you're going to find this somewhere between the $600 and $700 mark. And for a P229 or 226 or one of those models, that type of money is an incredible deal. So it is certainly worth looking into if you're in the market for something like this. Now, of course, it is unloaded. I do have an unloaded magazine in here as usual. I just prefer it that way. But let's go ahead and knock some specs of this little guy out of the way. The overall length is 7.7 inches. The height is 5.4 inches. The barrel length is 3.9 inches. And give you a good look at the width here. The width of the firearm is 1.5 inches, so it is a pretty wide fella, no doubt about that. From a weight standpoint, and here's another advantage of this particular one, the weight is a little under 30 ounces. It's about 29.5 ounces, and the reason is the frame on this is actually an alloy frame rather than full steel. So you're going to get a little bit of that weight advantage, although from a range and just kind of plinking standpoint, whatever, you're going to give up a little bit of weight there too. So there's always a sacrifice, one for the other. From a magazine standpoint, it does come with two steel 15-round magazines, and these are just kind of the average Sig Sauer magazines. They're relatively pricey, coming in somewhere between $40 and $50, depending on where you're shopping. Now, this particular model, being the Enhanced Elite with this type of grip, has the P229-1 magazine. I understand that there are a couple of different versions of the magazine, so if you're shopping for those, be sure to get the right model for sure. So from a feature standpoint, let's go ahead and talk about the frame overall for just a little while. Now, it does have absolutely fantastic grips, and as I shopped around for a couple of different models, one of the other models that I looked at was called the Combat model. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the grip I didn't think was quite as comfortable, and I also didn't think it was quite as good looking, so it was another reason to go with this one. So the grip texture on this, and this is a polymer grip, it's actually reasonably aggressive. I'd say it's somewhere in the medium aggressive texturing that goes all the way around the sides and the back as one piece. And I believe it's an E2 grip, if I remember my Sig Sauer lore properly. But correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, as I know you will. And then the front strap does have nice checkering on it that's actually built into the frame. So again, from an ergonomic and a grip standpoint, I think this feels about as good as a P229 can, with the exception of the Legion with those G10 grips on that one. But those are specific to that model. It's hard to get those Legion grips for another firearm. You can get pretty close, but you can't get the exact same ones. But I like these. These actually do the job really well. Now, you'll notice this does have a pretty enhanced beaver tail on it, so it's a little bit different than some of the other P229s out there. So it really allows you to get your grip up absolutely as high as you possibly can, and certainly protects you from any slide bite or anything like that. Now, you'll notice, and Sig Sauers are pretty famous for this, it does have a pretty high bore height. So we'll talk a little bit more about the shooting here in just a little bit. But if bore axis, bore height means something to you, might be something to consider. From a functions standpoint, a couple of things. It definitely does have your standard mag release here on the left-hand side. Now, one thing about these grips I would have liked to have seen, I would have liked to have seen them kind of bevel or recess the end of the grip here just a little bit more, so it was a little bit easier to access the magazine release, although it still definitely does a good job without question. And then from a slide lock, slide slide release standpoint, of course, not being ambidextrous, as you'll notice, but this definitely functions not only as a slide lock, but it certainly does as a release as well, and I used it many times at the range without a problem whatsoever. Now, like I said before, this is a double action, single action firearm, so it is hammer driven. You could get a couple of different options with the P-Series line. You can get a single action, that sort of thing. I really prefer the standard operating Sig Sauer. I like the conventional functionality of this. Now, you can't carry it cocked and locked because there is no safety on it. However, it does have this lever right here that goes up and down. Actually functions as a decocker. So you would carry it like this in this setup right here, and your first trigger pull would be double action, and then you would move to a lighter single action. And of course, we'll get to that trigger here in just a bit. From a takedown standpoint, it does have your standard Sig Sauer takedown. You do need to lock it back, as you would expect, and then it has a takedown lever right here. And once you get your lever down, you actually do not have to pull the trigger, which is really nice if that's something that is important to you. And then from an internal standpoint, it's very clean. I think Sig Sauer does a great job of putting together high quality internals that are just ready to go out of the box, which is great. It does have a steel guide rod, which is nice if that's something that's meaningful to you. And then from a recoil spring, it's a single sort of recoil spring. It's actually it's a double spring that's twisted together, and it does a pretty good job of mitigating recoil. There might be some perhaps that are a little bit better out there, but considering the weight and the heft of this firearm, it actually does a pretty good job. Now, it does have an accessory rail for your lights, lasers, grenade launchers, as you would expect, and that's pretty much it from a frame standpoint. Now, the slide does have your back serrations on it, again, as you would expect, and they are very usable. They've got just enough grip onto them to be able to really actuate that slide, and then they have half front serrations as well, so if you like to do any sort of press checking or anything like that, you definitely can. Now, I opted for the P229 over the 226 because I really like the styling of the 229. It's a little bit more compact, so you're losing, I don't know if it's half an inch, 3/4 of an inch, what have you, with the 226. But then I think also the look of it just, I think it's a little bit cleaner look because that 226 has a more tapered front onto it. But again, the 226 is a good looking gun as well. From a sight perspective, the Enhanced Elite does come with your Sig Light night sights, which is great. I do wish they had an option for those HD sights that came on the Legion, because those are pretty sweet, but unfortunately they don't. So you could certainly pick up some aftermarket sights if you wanted to, but these Sig Light night sights definitely do a good job, and they do have a nice ledge for one-handed manipulations if need be. Another thing about the Enhanced Elite that's really nice, and we're not going to focus on the trigger just yet. We're going to get to some shooting here in a moment, but it does come with your short reset trigger, and that was really important to me. One of the things I really like about the Legion is the reset. I mean, the trigger all told on the Legion is fantastic. Probably one of the best triggers I've ever used. So I wanted to get as close to it as possible, and having that SRT trigger in here gets you pretty darn close. The reset is fantastic. Not quite as good as the Legion, but it is almost there. So it was good enough for this particular firearm right here. So that's it from a specs and a feature standpoint. When we come back, we're going to be looking at that trigger and then give an overall summary. But let's go ahead and take a look at a little bit of shooting and see how this guy does. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that footage at the range. So I've taken this to the range quite a few times over the last, about 2.5 months, and I've had a great time with it. Some days I do a little bit better than other days. Of course, that's the same with me with most guns. If you've been following the channel, you've probably noticed that as well. But again, it's a great shooter, and if I'm trying to emulate as close as I can to a Legion, and I know I've said that several times, but I'm a big fan, from a budget standpoint, this gets pretty darn close. Now, a couple of things about it, however, because it's an alloy frame, you are sacrificing a few ounces that help absorb recoil and help mitigate any muzzle rise. So there is a little bit more of that with this, but this definitely is a pleasure to shoot. Now, I mentioned before we're going to talk about the trigger here for just a moment or two, and we definitely will. So, of course, again, your first trigger pull on this is going to be your double action pull, and there it is right there. I'm going to hold this a little bit more steady here. So there's your double action right there. I measured this off camera and it was coming in right around 9.5 ounces, or 9.5 pounds rather. So not too bad for a double action firearm. But then when we get to, and I got to get my finger out of the way here for this reset, that reset is right there, and then we go back out to the start. That reset is pretty darn short, and I'll do that again. We'll do this single action this time. So your single action right there is coming in right about 5.5 pounds, which is really pretty good. And there's your reset again. So a great reset. It's not quite as short as a Legion, but it's pretty darn close. So that SRT trigger definitely helps out quite a bit. And you can actually buy the SRT trigger if you don't have one already in your firearm and put that in. And I've done that before, and it's actually not entirely too difficult. It takes about 20 minutes and a couple of tools, and you're good to go. So from a shooting perspective and from a trigger perspective, the P-Series firearms definitely have a lot to offer, and they are a lot of fun at the range. And with this particular blue titanium enhanced elite, you get a lot of fantastic features for your buck, especially with the value price that it has with it. And frankly, I think it's kind of an unusual and kind of a cool looking gun. After a while, I get a little bit tired of black guns and FDE guns and even gray guns, that sort of thing. They're all fun, they're all nice, but it's kind of fun to splurge and do something just a little bit different. And I think this definitely fits the bill without it looking entirely too goofy. I've seen a few of those goofy guns, you probably have too. But this is pretty good. So once again, the P229 Enhanced Elite Blue Titanium. I'm excited to hear what you think about this in the comments. If you've got experience with any of the P-Series firearms, if you've got any questions about my experience with this one, don't forget, join Big Johnson Guns and Gear 1776 or Bust and me every Wednesday night for a chat about everything related to firearms. And of course, we switch up duties, so you got to follow those other guys as well, so you can keep up on a week-to-week basis. And also, don't forget to check out Abaddon Apparel for all of your Second Amendment apparel needs and some other really cool features on that firearm. So, once again, thanks so much for joining me. Appreciate it, and I will see you next time.